Well, hello everyone, Will Interest here, and today I'm going to be posting a different style of video from what I normally post. This one's going to be related to another type of hobby that I have, which is related to crime and mystery. This case actually takes place in the Yukon territory, way up in northern Canada. And in the backdrop you can see this is an aerial view of Dawson City, Yukon. This is the heart of the Klondike gold fields, the Klondike gold rush that occurred in the late 1890s and still is persistent today. And this town is going to be vital to this particular case. I'm quite surprised that this case does not have a lot of attention on YouTube, so I figured I'd post one with this video. I don't have the best quality webcam and the sound likes to get distorted every once in a while, so we'll try to see how this turns out. But this individual that we're going to be talking about is Theodore Kampf, and his family and friends refer to him as either Ted or Teddy. And this case spans both the US and Canada. So we're just going to delve right into it. I'm just kind of reading some of my notes here. All of the information I got is from online, so there will be sources that I'll post down below in the link. So Ted Kampf, he was born on March 30th, 1935 in the Philadelphia area, and he spent just about all of his life living across the Delaware River in Oaklyn, New Jersey. There isn't really much known about him other than the fact that he worked at Bell Telephone Company, and his parents described him as being somewhat of an egghead and, quote, not thinking that people were bad, unquote. He was a part of the U.S. Army as a reservist. He was a photographer, like me, and he was one who frequented the National Geographic magazines. He traveled extensively around the U.S., and he was highly academic and intellectual. And he had quite a bit of wanderlust, and one of the places he really wanted to visit was the Yukon territory and the Klondike goldfields. So, that takes us to July 6, 1981. Teddy Kampf, he was 46 years old at this time. He left his residence for a long road trip pretty much across the country, the US, and he was going to cross into Canada right near Vancouver, drive straight through British Columbia, and arrive in Dawson City, Yukon to supposedly visit a friend. And he was driving a recently purchased 1980 brick brown Chevrolet pickup truck, and it was mounted with a camper shell. He said goodbye to his parents, and that would be the last time his parents would see him. Apparently his friend was a landowner in Dawson City. So in 2021, so this is fast forwarding nearly 40 years later, the RCMP investigators, that's Royal Canadian Mounted Police, they had speculated that at the time Teddy took his trip, he was in between jobs, and this was part of a bigger vacation. I'm quoting what they're saying. He may have wanted to do a couple things on this trip, and coming up here was one of them. He seemed like he was on an adventure, I suppose. So 5 days after Kampf left his residence in New Jersey, he finally made contact with his parents, letting them know where he was. 2 days later, on July 13th, 1981, he called his parents from Mount Vernon, Washington. That is between Bellingham and Seattle. And he was notifying that he was going to cross the border into Canada. And that would be the last time anybody would hear from him. And for a while there, he did not make any contact, and his parents were actually not concerned due to the fact that that summer, 1981, there was an ongoing postal strike going on across all of Canada. But this is where things get a little murky. So unbeknownst to Teddy's parents at the time, soon after he crossed into Canada, some of Teddy's traveler's checks were cashed at a bank in British Columbia. Now Teddy, he carried about $5,000 worth of traveler's checks on his entire trip. The ones that were cashed at the bank in BC apparently had forged signatures, though the bank tellers who cashed the forged traveler's checks did not question the signatures, and none could recall the person who represented the checks. And to further add, a camera that was used to photograph customers at the bank happened to break the day before this unknown individual came in. So we fast forward to 2 weeks after Teddy last called his parents in Mount Vernon. On July 27th, Teddy's truck was involved in a fender bender in Boise, Idaho. The driver who wrecked into the other person, he identified himself as Teddy Kampf. The other driver who was hit, her name was Christine Christensen, and she was seeking insurance information. So she wrote to Kampf's parents to say she'd been involved in a traffic accident with their son. When Teddy's parents phoned her, she provided a physical description of the truck driver, a tall, thin man in his 20s, which of course was half the age that Teddy was, so this obviously did not match his description. Moving forward into August, unbeknownst to Teddy's parents, there were more of his traveler's checks that were being cashed in North and South Dakota, and it was by somebody other than Teddy. So fast forward several more weeks, we finally get into October of 1981. Teddy's parents and his family are getting to be quite worried about where he is, and they finally alert the police. It is at this point that the police then find out about the use of the forged checks that I mentioned earlier, and the FBI, who did not routinely work on missing persons cases, stepped in when the presence of forged checks were known. And this kind of set Teddy's father into a little uproar, to which he responded, "We're not worried about the damn checks." And the Canadian authorities had also stepped in, as the checks cashed in BC were indication that Teddy likely made it into Canada. At the end of October of 1981, specifically on October 29th, Teddy's truck was found by a group of hunters in a ravine, pretty well concealed, in fact, just off the road near Flint Creek Pass. This is outside of Phillipsburg, Montana. So here we are at another bizarre location. Now, the only problem is that the Montana authorities did not report this to the Oakland police until a few months later, on February 22nd, 1982. And by then the truck had been handled by so many people that it was deemed as useless for evidence. And so that is pretty much it for leads, and for nearly 40 years this case would be cold. However, it turns out that his remains were actually found, and they were found decades earlier. So this takes us to May 21st, 1983. A family that was camping near the North Fork Dam about 25 miles east of Dawson City. They happened to be looking for firewood, and as they were searching through woodland brush, they stumbled upon a gruesome sight. They found the remains of a human skeleton along with some clothing attached, and the remains were buried in an apparent attempt to conceal the remains. When authorities arrived and gathered all the evidence, they didn't disclose too much, other than saying that this person was a victim of homicide. And this person would not be identified for many years to come, simply known as the Dawson City John Doe. However, with advances in technology, a process called genetic genealogy, the remains of this Dawson City John Doe were positively identified as that of Teddy Kampf in the year 2021, so nearly 38, 40 years later. So authorities in Canada believe that Teddy was killed shortly after he arrived in Dawson City in July of 1981. The person who drove Teddy's truck had left it in Montana, and they think that this person possibly has a connection to Montana and possibly to mining, because Dawson City and Phillipsburg are both heavily known mining regions. And RCMP investigators are looking for information on anyone from Montana or the Granite County area who may have gone to Dawson City, possibly to mine in the Yukon or on their way to Alaska. They also believe that perhaps Teddy's murder was the work of a number of people. In 1983, gold prices were quite high, so there would have been a lot of numerous foreigners who would have come up through Dawson City. Now, unfortunately, his parents, Teddy's parents, would never ever know what happened to their son, for Teddy's father died in 1995 and his mother Mary died in 2002. And her obituary said that she was the mother of the, quote, late Theodore Jr., and it appeared that she presumed Teddy was already deceased before her death. It's rather unfortunate, as they will never acquire a peace of mind as to what happened. But hopefully they are together, if not here, up in the heavens. So, I bring this case to attention. It's unsolved. It's partially solved because his remains have been identified, but it's still unsolved as to who the murderer or murderers are. So I want to bring this case to attention, hopefully shed some light, maybe somebody out there knows. So we're going to get to a couple of these panoramas now, and this first panorama I told you earlier was of Dawson City. This is just an overview of this mining community. It is located right alongside the banks of the Yukon River, and if I could close that, there we go. There actually is a ferry crossing where one can go across and to catch the top of the World Highway that takes one to Alaska. And this is just a view straight down. And here is another view of Dawson City from afar. This is actually a really cool panorama. It actually shows the confluence of the Klondike and the Yukon rivers. The Yukon River is a very murky beige color, much larger in size. Everything's flowing downstream, and you can see how the waters are not mixed. It's really kind of very drastically pronounced. The Klondike River comes from this direction. This is the highway going about 25 miles that direction. That'll get you to where the North Fork Dam is. A little bit further to the east of Dawson City, these are typical mine tailings in aerial view. And you could just see, this is just a small snippet of all the mining activity that took place within this region. And you could just see just how elaborate all these tailings are. A lot of work and effort just to extract gold out of the ground. And finally, this panorama here, I am 99% certain that this is where the North Fork Dam existed. It's hard to tell. All I had was a single sepia colored photograph that showed it was actually taken right here, and I believe this is where the North Fork Dam was. So this is the road. On old topo maps, it actually used to cross here and made a loop. The road came from way out there, it crossed the river, made a loop all the way on this side of the North Klondike River and back over here. The Dempster Highway flows this direction, going north all the way to the Arctic coast, and the river has changed course quite a number of times, and you can see where the old road here ends. You can actually see my car here. I believe right in here was an old steam shovel, and the North Fork Dam was likely right here. You can kind of see old remains of what I believe to be the dam. And from this point across the river, you almost can't even see any trace of the old road whatsoever. A lot of the river has channeled through the forest. But this old sepia colored photograph showed a bridge crossing here, and there was a vehicle parked right here, and there used to be a little campsite and a walkway to the beach that was right here. And I believe, just based on this sole photo, that this red X here marks the location of where Teddy Kampf's remains were found. To give you a sense, this is all extreme wilderness, so finding his remains was a needle in the haystack. This is all boreal black spruce forest. A lot of this terrain this far north, the underlying ground is all permafrost. So, but you can just see just how vast and endless the terrain is. And so I am fairly certain that this was where his remains were found. But I could be wrong. I'm just basing it on one photograph that has some pretty vital information. Well, there you have it. This is the case of Teddy Kamp, and I applaud you for tuning into this whole thing. I may have stuttered, been a little bit nervous here. This is my first time ever doing something like this, but I hope you enjoyed it and gained some insight. We will talk to you later.